So it gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Michael Meadowcroft. Michael is again extremely well known, and it would take me too long to tell you all I know about him, and you might not want me to tell you all I know about. But Michael was MP, as we know, for Leeds West. He's had a distinguished record advising other countries about appropriate democratic procedures. He has an eye for the ridiculous, and those of you who buy the New Statesman will have seen his many contributions to the This England feature. More appropriately for this evening, he was distinguished president of the Leeds Library for many years. And we also know him through the many excellent series of lectures he gave about prominent politicians. And I think there are people in the room who probably came to this Leeds Library to hear those talks in recent years. Michael has promised us that there will one day, these biographies will be in a book. And I think that promise is still live. We look forward to that. And Michael is also, as he'll explain to this evening, an avid collector of ephemera. He doesn't just collect them, he makes use of them for historical research. So over to you, Michael. We look forward to your talk. And I'm just going to try and move this to give you a bit more space.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I'm indeed one of those people who collects things. I discovered a long time ago the only way to deal with this addiction is to have boundaries on what you collect. But within that, everything goes. And I could have done this talk 10 times over with 10 times different things. And I would rely on someone at some point to say, that's enough, because I normally go on until they start serving Horlicks. And or Ken on the lecture circuit. Because what happens is I'm dealing with these pieces. I remember anecdotes about things connected with it and go on with that. The thing is, this is a very different kind of talk to the usual ones where you have a PowerPoint and you see it and so on. Because these items, if you want afterwards, I'll put them out on the table and you can come and see them, because in many cases they need to be taken out of the folders and looked at, because you can only see normally the front page as part of the PowerPoint to do that. All I would say is be extremely careful, because some of them are delicate, and more so than I am, I think, really. But there we are. So embark on this and see how we get on. There we are, the first one. Let me talk about this while we're on. One of the things that you find with looking for ephemera of various sorts, certainly the official definition of ephemera is something that lasts one day. Well, the stuff that I've got here goes back to 1774. It's rather longer than one day, but it's all stuff that was intended for a very short life, even though it's survived many, many centuries and so on. And also, what is interesting is that one has an eye for a talk, one that's either given and might do again, or indeed a talk that you may well give. One of the great moments of Leeds history, of course, was way back in 1880, when the Liberals of Leeds went down to London and persuaded Gladstone to be the candidate in Leeds. In those days, there were 3 vacancies, but the elections only had 2 votes. And it was a form of proportional representation. If you think about it, the parties had to weigh up how many candidates to put forward and where they would concentrate their canvassing to try and maximize the vote. It was a form of PR that didn't last very long, as it happened, because 1885 they divided the city up into 1-member seats. But until then, you had this curious device. And at the time, they got Gladstone. He never appeared, by the way, any time at all in Leeds during the election. It was duly at the top of the poll. He was also a candidate in Midlothian, which is largely sort of Edinburgh. And he was elected in Midlothian. And he wrote the most diplomatic letter imaginable to the Leeds Liberals when he said, I'm very grateful for the honour that the city has done, etc., etc., the town has done, rather, to me. But I've decided to sit for Midlothian on the grounds that it is clear from the result that any Liberal can hold Leeds, whereas Midlothian will require all my personal attention. And that's what happened. But the problem for the Leeds Liberals was that to follow that, the by-election which would come for that seat, the Tories had already said they wouldn't oppose the candidate put forward by the Liberals. But the Liberals owed a debt to Edward Baines, because Baines had been one of the MPs and had been he had been defeated the previous election because a third Liberal candidate stood and split the vote for these seats. And so they sort of promised him that. And they then had this adoption meeting, supposedly for Baines. And lo and behold, some of the younger Liberals, rather like this young man, Herbert Gladstone, who was only young and unmarried, and particularly all the women Liberals came. And at Baines' adoption meeting, they proposed seconded and carried the nomination of Herbert Gladstone. So the Liberals were in a dilemma. So what they did, Gladstone then managed to procure a knighthood for Baines, and there was that was his consolation prize. And I came across, amazingly, the little booklet, which is the public presentation at the Albert Hall in Leeds, which of course is in the Mechanics Institute, with all the speeches verbatim that were made to support Baines and to such a great man he was. That just turned up, like all these things just turn up, and maybe at a book fair or on some second-hand counter or something. And so that was that. Now, if we can move on, Patrick, to the next slide. What Gladstone also did was he said, I will come to Leeds and spend some days with you. And in 1881, the year after, he did come. And there was a huge gathering. The Liberal organizer, a man called John Shackleton Mathers, who was described by the editor of the Leeds Mercury as the best wire puller I've ever met, a marvelous fixer. And he had a huge sort of marquee put up on the yard in front of the Coloured Cloth Hall. And it seated about 4,000 people. And they served 1,000 meals in this for this great dinner for Gladstone. But the thing was also around the sides, people could pay to watch Gladstone eat. And what Mathers did, he charged them a different fee the closer they were to Gladstone, and made a lot of money out of it. And if we want one day we ever get to this slide, you will see that there were all sorts of things done. That was one of the election cards for John Barron and Gladstone for that. The ordinary tickets for people who were not eating were just ordinary pieces of card, whereas the posh tickets had your place marked where you were seated for the banquet. And they were all then, you knew where you were going. The banquet, by the way, what I'm going to do afterwards, I'll put all these on the table at the side here, and you can come and look at them and pick them up and so on. And there's the card for the banquet. I said, these things do turn up so you can see what the marching band was playing during the whole meal. Right, okay. This is the second one from the same event. For the banquet and the menu there, which I opened. And I say, afterwards, you can, if we still have time before midnight, we'll be on the table to look at. So you see that there is the band of the Grenadier Guard and all for a political function, I might say. And there it was in the Coloured Cloth Hall. Can we go to the next, Patrick? Oh. Got that. We just take that off. Close that. Now we're going to count. You may remember reading about half-time working children who at a certain age were able to go to school part-time and work part-time. And I have a couple of the labour certificates that were done for that purpose at the time. As it happens, these are not from Leeds, they're from Ellen, which was where I was born. So they're there, but they are pretty horrifying certificates, really, aren't they, in their own way? Kids age, what was the child was, I think 11 from them, something like that. School attendance officer had to sign them all, and they're there. Come in the next one, please. Now, you had a public meeting towards a strike that may have happened, and here you have in 1906, with a substantial Jewish population in Leeds by that time, and Isabella Ford was one of the key people, Alf Mattison's wife as well, Mrs. Mattison there, and others, and it was in the two languages, in English and in Yiddish. And it's very interesting, I think, as early as that they deliberately made it so it could be understood by all the community. So that was something that took place on the meeting there. So I came across that just turned up. Next one, please. Now, I've lectured before on the Great Socialist Convention in Leeds. This was to celebrate the first Russian Revolution, 1917. And they chose Leeds because it was a great railway centre where people could come from all over the place. And it was lobbied quite substantially by a far-right organisation. In those days, you know, you had the League of Empire Loyalists and all the rest of them. Nowadays, you had the BNP and also lobbied them. And they were supposed to have this great meeting in the Albert Hall, which is in the Mechanics Institute, now the Leeds Museum. And that was owned by the council. And they lobbied the council, and the Conservative controlled council at the time withdrew the permission to use it. And this was 48 hours only before the thing was due to start. So what the organisers did, they booked the Colosseum, which is across the road. You know, the huge place there, and one of the largely unknown places in Leeds, again, I've spoken about. Now, the Colosseum held twice as many people as the Albert Hall did. And it did them a good turn because they filled the Colosseum. And they also tried to stop the various hotels letting rooms overnight for the delegates. And so then they all were farmed out, the members of the Labour Party and the other left-wing organisations in Leeds, which again did a good turn because they got to know people and kept up the links ever after. So this was a great demonstration. They had loads of speeches commending the Russian Revolution. Only one great speech, well, two great speeches, I guess, actually. One was from the Seamen's Union because they were having people killed all the time and trying to get people supplies to Russia. The other one was by Ernie Bevan, a very young man at the time, but Ernie said, look, don't be taken in by all this nonsense and so on. And that was what happened. So there was one of the tickets for the meeting at the Colosseum, all done, as I say, within 48 hours beforehand. And then afterwards, they were supposed to be followed up by forming of socialist organizations, including within the forces, the armed forces. Now, the government actually considered in cabinet whether to ban the whole thing. But Lloyd George was a far more clever person than that. And Lloyd George said to the cabinet, so all the cabinet ministers, don't do that. He said, this is one of these types of meetings. It'll be all speeches and nothing will follow it. And he was absolutely right. There were loads of speeches and hardly anything happened ever after. And that was the new Charter of the Workers, about the only thing that materialized from this vast meeting in Leeds. But it was a huge event, and it was something that Leeds should also be commemorating many times in the future. Right, next, please. The Montague Burton lunch. This is a list of all the speakers from 1922 that have spoken at it. And it was all because Montague Burton was a great believer in the League of Nations, followed, of course, by the United Nations. And he started off in 1922 by having this lunch. Now, what he did also, to get to the canteen, anybody attending it, great and good, had to walk through the whole factory. So you pass by and pass the time of day with all the workers at the different benches, tailoring, cutting, putting together, and so on. And I spoke at one of these, and it's a great event. And that's one of the invitation cards with the menu and everything else. But when you look at it, there's all the royalty that spoke, Lord Mayors and Mayors, ambassadors and all sorts, and then common folk like me. But it's all there. But that was Montague Burton. Next, please. Now, 1926 was pretty well the end of the road as an important political force for the Liberals. They had been very key people on the council for a long time. In fact, they controlled the council for 60 years consecutively from the inception of democracy of the sort in 1835 right through to 1895, mainly by fiddling the aldermanic bench, which we could do in those days. But in 1926, Charlie Wilson, who was probably the greatest of all the politicians in the Conservative leader, he got fed up with not being able to govern with his own majority of Conservatives. And what he did was he bought off a whole set of Liberal members of the council, all the members councillors in the law, and 6 Liberals defected to the Tories. And that gave him a majority. And it so infuriated the Leeds Liberals that they picked all the Conservative held seats for the next November election and they targeted those and caused the Tories to lose those seats to Labour. But Wilson lost his majority within months and never came back. But even so, despite that, the Liberals were able to have this bazaar. And so these are all, as I say, all these will be on the side. You can look at them. And it's, again, it's astonishingly hefty thing. You've got the adverts, the paper from Crockett. Crockett's a great little firm. Youngman's printing thing, Bazaar Committee, object of the bazaar, a note on the history of the Liberal Association and so on. But then each day had a separate theme and so on. So he had all this, but they were able still to do that in 1928, 2 years after the Great Disaster. Next, please. Now, in those days, we did things well to be council. This was a visit to the gasworks by the gas committee. Look at it, fantastic, lovely, beautifully bound book it's on, with all the different things that the gas people, and they did this for all the different things. I won for the sewage works as well, just the same. But they did that because they, as you probably know, until the Labour government, the high point of local government was 1948. And in 1948, Leeds City Council ran gas, electricity, water, social security, all these things were run by the council. And so here you have Alderman Ratcliffe and the committee visiting the gasworks. The next, please. Now, Jack Badley was a tearaway. He really was. And in fact, when he came up the council, the Labour Party complained that ever since Alderman Badley had left the council, the Labour Party was given the runaround by the Tories. But after he'd been on the council for, as he said, 50 years, in the beginning of the Second World War, in 1940, he was expelled from the Labour Party. And he was expelled with a colleague called Craig Walker. And Craig Walker became the only communist councillor ever in Leeds. And he did that because when he and Badley were expelled, Craig Walker accepted it, and he then changed and became communist. And why they were expelled was because of this meeting, the Leeds Committee on the Defence of Democratic Rights, which they said are being eroded by wartime regulations. And the Labour Party in Leeds said, it's a communist party front and you're not to be associated with it. But Badley would not accept that. And he produced this booklet, the reasons why we shouldn't be expelled. And again, great little document of Leeds history. And that turned up to one particular, I think that was some kind of book fair or postcard or something like that. Next, please. Now, the two great Leeds papers, of course, were the Leeds Intelligencer, which became the Yorkshire Post, and the Mercury. And these are two letterheads. I like letterheads, by the way. They tell you an awful lot about the company and the people in it. And see how this is a letter from 1839, proprietor of the Leeds Intelligencer. And bottom you've got Leeds, not yet. You've just got a bit between your teeth now. And the bottom is from Edward Bain, proprietor of Leeds Mercury, 1853. And it's just an ordinary piece of, ephemera. That's all it is. But if you wanted to do a lecture on the Leeds Intelligence, the Yorkshire Post, or the Mercury, it makes a good image to show what impacted the history of the human life. Next, please. Now you see there was you had a posher. Okay, don't worry. We're all with. There we are. See, by this time they had a much posher letterhead, and they had a nice little engraving. And this is from 1908. And so you then have the nicely printed and so on. But again, Edward Baines was still Baines and Co. Limited, selling up to Mercury and so on. It eventually ended up being taken over by the Yorkshire Post, much to its great indignity. Next, please. The Leeds Rifles. Now, you had these territorial organisations. In fact, the great Harding, giver of all the statuary in the City Square and so on, he was always known as Colonel Harding. He never saw military service, but he was the commander of the Territorial Army League. And this is from the Leeds Rifles, West Riding of Yorkshire, Rifle Volunteers. And this is somebody being promoted to being the corporal. So again, it's something that's part and parcel of the history and of Harding. Next thing, please. Now, these engravings are marvelous. See, you will know Tower works because it's now being developed. We're still keeping the Italian towers, and all the various companies with these huge factories, works, and so on. They did these engravings on the letterhead, so you have a marvelous sight of what the company was like. Very impressive to impress all the potential customers. And that was again from Colonel Harding, Richardson, Rhodes, and so on. And as you see at the bottom, it tells you what they did. He was mainly into the pins and so on for wool. But he was a great inventor. One of the things he invented, made a lot of money out of, was an automatic counter of the things that were going through the machines and so on. You know, something you take for granted now, but not at the time. Next, please. You see this? You notice the spelling? Worsted, lamb's wool, and Angola. It's not just a funny art, it's Angola. And it often was called Angola rather than Angora. But you see, it's 1838, and you notice that it is consulate near Leeds. This Steve will be well acquainted with this sort of thing, but it was not regarded as being within the fleet at the time. And this was a customer in Bannockburn, fair distance to go, I think. Next, please. Manufacturing confectioners, known in Leeds as Spice Man. And why on earth they had a cow as a trademark, I never understood. But it's a very curious thing, see, but manufacturing confectioners, and they were in Greenwood Road. George Ratcliffe, we noted before with the gasworks, he was another confectioner, but he was based in Holbein. But that was it's a very odd trademark. Next, please. Now you see here, now you have Rhodes at the top there, and you see there it's got royal connections. I don't know what permission they had particularly. The agent for royal, with the two photographs there. This, of course, you're getting on to 1899, so you have photographs by then. Okay, Tom Road Arm. And at the bottom, Beckett's Bank, of course, is but you still have they called, I think, down Park Road. Is it a restaurant or bar or something out in Beckett's Bank? But he was one of the originals there. And of course, the Beckett family were a great conservative family in Leeds. And that's turned up. That says Beckett and Co. Bankers, Leeds. So you have it there. And the next, please. This is an example of the flyers for business. I love them. Is it this? Goodall's custard powder. And then at the bottom, egg powder. And all the different medals they got. 8 prizes for their Yorkshire relish and so on. And all in full colour as well, I noticed that. And it's important to every housewife and to every marriageable young lady. You ought to remember that, Brian. That's what you had to have. You had to have Goodall's custard powder or egg powder, and all things will happen to you. Excellent and palatable household recipes. And the next, please. A while ago, Victor Watson was writing to various people around Leeds, saying, did they have any of the programs from the musical festival? Because there was no archive of the musical festival in Yorkshire Archives. And a number of us produced things from our own libraries and so on. This is just one of the things, but you see, massive program they had in those days. You've got this great, with all the seating plan and everything, but there were very, very important things. And of course, as you probably know, they had pieces written for these festivals. Their Feathers Feast was written for it in the 30s. And it's not particularly well known, but Gree wrote something for a Leeds musical festival, and he died on the way to Leeds to conduct it. I mean, he didn't get very far. The train had only got part way around Norway, but nonetheless, he was on his way to Leeds, and that was a great blow to him. Next one, please. Now, this is the sort of curiosity I really enjoy. This is a temperance concert by a temperance organization. And the title of the piece is, you see, what are the wild waves saying? Well, they were kind of saying, don't drink. But beyond that, I'm not quite sure. But it was, again, they hired the town hall and did it properly. And then they had this tremendous program, the Coral Cave and Submarine Market, miscellaneous attractions and so on. But they did it and they promoted temperance. Had a good uptake, I think, at the time. Next, please. Queen's Theatre. I didn't know that there was a Queen's Theatre in Holbeck. It's in Meadow Lane. And it survived quite a while, you see, into the 30s. And this is one of the programs. Again, it's quite delicate, but it again turns up as a piece of history. If you're doing a lecture about theatres of Leeds, it's quite nice to have the features with all the various adverts as well as the program. And the next, please, Patrick. Now you see here again with the town hall, the Bramley Harmonic Society. Well, so they were able to, again, just from one township at Leeds, put on a concert, an organ recital on March the 20th, 1926. And you've got the sort of a program, smoking permitted, not nowadays. You had various pieces here, it's all set out there, including Largo from New World Symphony, so then Martyrs of the Arena, whatever they were. But again, it's just a nice little piece if you want to do something about either about Bramley or from organ side of the town hall. They've existed a good while. Next, please. Here you have typically a piece from the wartime. You'll see as air raid precautions, what you should do if the siren went off. And yeah, I think it used to be fascinating. It says, please refuse program, its seal is broken. Remember that when saying that, so that people couldn't resell them to unsuspecting hunters. Yeah, John Gielgud appearing in Macbeth, that particular one, but a little bit about the area of precaution appeal to me. Next, please. Now, this is connected with Jos Walsh, the Labour councillor, alderman, and Lord Mayor. Jos Walsh had a friend who had taken a liking to a young lady actress in those days, and she was appearing in Leeds. And being rather shy, this guy, he asked Jos to go along with him to this because he wanted to click with this young lady, the actress in the production. And this is the actual night they went. This is the program for that night. And she was called Aida Wolf. She was actually her name was actually Ada, but she didn't think that fitted well with being an actress. So she changed it to Aida, and they went. As it happened, the guy who wanted to click with her didn't, because Jos did. And Jos married her, and we stayed together a long time. But I managed to find the actual program for the night they went, which I thought was rather good. And the next, please. Kathleen Ferrier singing at Brunswick Methodist Church. Another scandal, the building demolished, marvellous building off Wade Lane, just on the side there, great building. Kathleen Ferrier, photograph of Kathleen Ferrier singing there. The Wakefield Choral Society, 150 voices, and so on. And you'll notice that one of the patrons of it who was presiding, Paulson, of all people. But that was 1946. But that was with her and the photograph. What's the next thing, Patrick? What have we got now? Oh, late lamented Yorkshire Symphony Orchestra. I've quite a few programs of concerts there. what I liked about this one was the guest conductor was Adrian Bolt. I'm old enough to have met Adrian Bolt, and I chaired a meeting in London one time, and he was very nice, a very gracious man to have the guest speaker. But it's a shame we lost the Yorkshire Symphony Orchestra. In the end, the council pulled the plug on its subsidy, and that was the end of that. Onward. The Leeds Playhouse. One of the first things that happened when I was first elected to the council 55 years ago was straight away I was lobbied by the campaign for Leeds Playhouse. This was particularly the Newlyn, Barbara Newlyn and Walter. In actual fact, I realised after a while that it was essentially a communist-run organisation that was doing all the campaign, and as a consequence, it was brilliantly efficient. It really was terrific, and they followed everybody that came onto the council and so on. And I was very happy to be involved. And one of the things they did back in 1970, they got various famous actors to write endorsing the Playhouse campaign. And I have 7 different letters from different people. Here you are with Michael Horton at the bottom. He says, P.S. May you offer me a job one day? Really good. It was a very good campaign and went well. Next, please. Royal visits were a great thing then, and there were 2 particular ones. And again, the programs for them, the souvenir, I don't know what you said, pieces of literature that were produced, have both turned up in my various guises. So you have the 1908 for Edward VII in Alexander, and the Prince of Wales, who become for a very brief time Edward VIII. They were quite substantial again, inevitably. Souvenir and Guide, produced by the Leeds Mercury. I don't remember which one produced by, but you can have a look at the scene. Next, Patrick, please. 1774, there was a proposal to have a canal from Leeds to Selby. Not surprisingly, the area of navigation people were very opposed to the whole thing. They thought it would detract from their trade. But this is the actual plan that was produced for the parliamentary debate on it, where the route would be from Leeds to Selby in 1774. It did actually go to Parliament, but there was a competing claim for a different route. And although this was the preferred one in people's minds, so they were putting it forward, the Parliament voted for the other one. The reason was that this one, I think, was 23 miles, and the other one was only 7. So it was a pretty powerful case to have such a short route. But that's a very nice piece of ephemera that survived from 1774. Next one, please. 1875, Spring Assizes, calendar of prisoners, and all the different prisoners that had to be produced for the assize court in Leeds. I don't know whether you know, but there used to be an annual assize dinner when the judges came to Leeds. And it was one of those things where invitations were very much sought after by councillors. Normally, they've had to be on the council for quite a while before you got the invitation to the assize dinner. No speeches, but the judges who were on circuit would be brought round by the leader of the council and introduced. And because I was the leader of the Liberal Party, which I'm such as it was on the council, I had an invitation. And it was for white tie, would you believe? White tie, not black tie. And I said, thanks to Lord Mayor very much, but I really can't cope with white tie. And he rang me and he said, Mark, said, if it was black tie, could you manage that? I said, well, yes. He said, do that. He said, and I'll guarantee somebody else will have black tie as well. And it changed ever after. So I accomplished a great deal in the council to change that. And the thing was, one of the judges was the Lord Justice Waller, and he was being brought round by Frank Marshall, then was very good, I thought, considered leader of the council. When they got to me, Frank said, now this is Councillor Meadowcroft, leader of the Liberal Party, such as it is. And Lord Justice Waller leaned over and said, sotto voce, before I wasn't allowed to have any politics, House of Liberal. So Frank laughed. Frank actually was a very splendid guy. I mean, a strange conservative that municipalised the Grand Theatre that he did. And he was very good at getting it fixed. He rang me and said, you know, I think we should buy the Grand Theatre to stop it closing. And indeed, they thought they were going to try and demolish it actually. What would your group think? And I said, we'd be in favour, so in that case we'll do it. And that's what happened. I don't know whether you know, but if the council is applying to itself a planning permission, you can get what's called an alternative development certificate to stop the corruption in effect, where you have to say what it could be useful, it wasn't going to be useful for the planning application you're making. But the council said it can't be used for anything else. It is what it is, the Grand Theatre. And the government planning people agreed. And in fact, the council got it virtually for nothing. He was bankrupt. And that's how we got the Grand Theatre. But this is the list of all the prisoners that came up for trial in 1875. Next, please. There was a very big event for the opening of Roundy Park, and there was a Goodall's again, the custard powder for people and so on, the rest of that, produced this great handbook, The Great Day, 1875. This, I have to tell you, is a facsimile that was produced much later, but nonetheless, it shows you what they did to try and popularize it. It wasn't a very popular thing to buy actually at the time. It was only when they extended the trams around their park that it became more popular with the public. Otherwise, they thought it was a great waste of money. Right, what else do we have coming up now? Oh yes, two little certificates. It's the sort of thing that turn up and I rather like. One is the South Market weighing machine. The South Market was down Meadow Lane, separate from the main market. But here you have this 1845. How do these things survive in such good condition from 1845? I don't know. What I like about the burial ground certificate, written at the bottom here, it says depth of grave 10.5 feet. Now, I'm not quite sure what that implies. Presumably it meant how many people you would get in it at first, but they had to write it on each one. So some of them must have been smaller and some of them bigger. But there you are. 10.5 feet was that one that this person bought. Nowadays, as you know, nearly everybody, of course, now is cremated. In fact, apart from countries like apart from India, where everybody's cremated, the UK has got the highest rate of cremations in the world. Interestingly, number 28 in my series of useless information. Next one, please. Now, have you heard of Dr. Albert? Indeed, great man, right? He was a great pioneer of contraception, dealing properly with women and so on. But for his pains, he got struck off. But somehow or other, he carried on practicing in private. But you see here, you've got part of the town has got one of his visiting cars, consultation in Park Square. But also there was effort to fundraise to assist him, and that's one of the forms where you could go and get more people in support of Dr. Albert. But I think he way ahead of his time, actually, as far as I can see. The thing at the bottom is curious. I don't just one of these things that turned up. This is for the Yorkshire Agricultural Society, but it belonged to Albert. It's got his signature on the back of it. Nothing to do with medicine. We just obviously had an interest in agriculture as well. And what's the next thing? Again, do people ever say Shadowbank these days? We used to all go on Shadowbank. I just think we used to go to Blackpool Illuminations concert on the Shadowbank. By my time, they were rather more modern than that. It's a fabulous illustration of one of these Shadowbank, motor Shadowbank excursions, company in Noel Lane, Birmingham. And then the Pudsey Parish Church Mothers Union Autumn Fair, and you bought as part of the fundraising your souvenir recipe book from the Mothers Union. Two things again appeared. Next, please. Now, how many of you can remember your co-op divvy number? Can you? How many of you? I can remember mine certainly. Yeah, just some of us are old. So this is one of these divvy books, which again young people today have a clue as to what happened with this, but yeah, that's right, you did, and what you bought was entered in your little book, and at the end of a particular period, you get your divvy. It was like a savings scheme, really, and it mounted up over a period of time. And so you have the Leeds Industrial Cooperative Society Members Share Book. Somebody living in Rodley. Leeds Tercentenary, actually. Oh, sorry, I was well. Now I have to confess, I've searched, I cannot find these two pieces of ephemera. So I think it must be really ephemera, only I said today. But that, of course, is Mary Gawthorpe. And one of these postcards produced for the suffragettes as if I remember that said the hat wasn't just for a decoration, it was protection in case some police officer or whatever passed you over their head. He had these very elaborate headgear. Fun? Live with newspaper. I hope it was the Leeds Intelligence and not the Meadowcroft. Yeah. So, but she was an amazing woman. She's not as well known as Leonora Cohen, actually, but I think in many respects she was superior. She had a highly intelligent woman. The suffragettes sent her off to Wales to run the campaign in Wales, and she learned Welsh within days, apparently. She could actually go and speak on platforms. Brilliant. Also, marvelous at dealing with hecklers. But then on the right, Leonora Cohen. Again, she's well known for her suffragette works and so on. But people don't often realize she was a Labour candidate 3 occasions in Leeds. Now, I met Leonora Cohen, how old I am, in 1976. By this time, she'd retired to North Wales. And I was at a Liberal conference there, so it's a good occasion to meet her. So her address was Whitehall Court, Whitehall Road, Ross-on-Sea. So I thought it must be a care home. So I wrote to the matron, did you think Mrs. Cohen would be able to see me, you see? And I had a reply by return from Mrs. Cohen saying, I will see you at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. So I turned up. The first thing she said to me, she said, I retired here when I was 93 to get away from people like you. Tremendous. And we had a terrific conversation. I mean, she was marvelous. And one of the things, of course, that in those days when Army Jail had women as well, and when she became a magistrate, she went to the jail, as magistrates do, and she asked to see the admissions book, and there was her name and no release date. Because when the war came, well, it didn't bother. And so she said, I'm still supposed to be here. And so on. But I said to her, I said, do you remember the gas workers' strike of 1890? Oh, yes, I'd just left school then. This is how far back you can go with somebody else. She was 103 by the time I ended and so on. But she was a rebel within the Labour Party as well. She got thrown out as a candidate at the time and had to go and give undertakings of best behaviour in the future. But that's 1922, that particular one. Next, please. Leeds Tercentenary was an astonishing festival. The 300th anniversary of the Charter of 1626. And they produced an incredible amount of material. I mean, I've got a fair bit of it. I've got at least 3 books, book-size things from it as well as all the exhibition material and so on. Special editions of the newspapers and everything. And this is just one of the items. But it's always worth looking out for Tercentenary items because quite a lot of them have got material in them that you don't find anywhere else. In fact, the newspaper, Leeds Special Edition of the Yorkshire Post, it has great long pieces from all the 3 party leaders. And there's material in there that you won't see anywhere else in the political arena. But this is just one of the cards showing what the celebrations were, daily celebrations. So, we come to the final piece. Here we are, yeah. Now, this I realize this is really where ephemera comes into its own. I rather like Edward Brotherton. I think he was a splendid man. And he was, of course, Conservative MP for Wakefield, elected at the by-election in 1902, but he wasn't really a politician at all. And Philip Snowden, in his memoirs, Snowden being the Labour candidate in the same by-election, relates with great affection about having meetings, public meetings, with Brotherton. He'd be asked a question to children, and he would give an answer, and his age would whisper in his ear, said, no, I've got that wrong. And he said this went on all the time at his meetings, but nobody bothered Graham duly elected. Now, when he came to the church centenary, he gave a Yorkshire Bank bankbook to every school child in Leeds with a shilling in it. Every school child got this. He'd done the same thing before in Wakefield and given to all Wakefield children for, I think it was a royal visit to that. And amazingly, 2 of these turned up different times. And here's one of the Leeds first centenary bank books given by Brotherton. As I say, I have a great affection for him. His manuscript diary is in special collections at Leeds University. And it is extremely sad because at one entry it says, our darling child born this day. 2 days later, our darling child died this day. And then a month later, my darling wife died this day. And he stayed a widower for 54 years after that. And he obviously was very fond of children, because every year at his house at Roundhay Hall, he would have a big party for every disabled child in Leeds and do that. And I suspect his philanthropy was an alternative to having the family and looking after the family. Yeah, I rather like him. But that was the story of Brotherton and his gifts. But you weren't allowed to take the shilling out for a year or something, sort of restrictions like that. Well, there you are. That's just bits and pieces, all help, I think, for various fixes you might one day give. They might be prompted in you by having it. But I say I'm one of these people who's collecting. So thank you very much.
Let's come on. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Well, if you go to something like a postcard fair, there's a whole lot of other things other than postcards, written pile of things and so on. And just go through that and you'd be surprised what you come across. It helps, of course, to have some knowledge of local events and so on, or names. You know, I came across an envelope addressed to Edmund Harvey's father, only because I knew the father's name. This marvellous envelope from early Victorian era and so on, so I knew what it was, so that helps. But there was a man called Neil Garland from Huddersfield, and he'd found a niche to make money in documents. And what he would do if there was a house clearance or a factory clearance, he would buy all the paper from it, because the dealers weren't interested in that. They're only interested in the, you know, furniture or equipment or whatever. So he ended up with that. And he had regular customers like me. And I'd go to one of these fairs and there'd be a huge envelope marked MM. And all the Leeds stuff for me to go through and to decide what I wanted. And none of it is expensive. I mean, you might pay a couple of quid for some item, but I mean, most of these sort of months, I would maybe spend 50 quid with him, you see all the bits and pieces, and have them all put aside. So that was one, and he's now long since retired, so I don't do it anymore. But every now and again, I get an envelope from Huddersfield, and there's another group of things, often letterheads with these marvelous engravings. So that was one way he was specialized in that. The other thing, of course, is that you'll find them at book fairs. Book fairs again have all sorts of bits of bric-a-brac around. I mean, at one in Ilkley, I found an original of Phil May, beautiful drawing of Joe Chamberlain, for instance. It just happened to be there on someone's store. So they turn up like that. And so, you might get some people tell you, well, I'm downsizing or whatever, and go and have a look. But they're around and about, if you know. By the way, there is one dealer in Lincoln, somewhere, Gainsborough way, who specializes in all this material. And a list comes out every month or so, it's for the whole country. But it's amazing thing. One of the most amazing things that was in one of their catalogs was a deed transferring land from an individual, probably a farmer in Bramley, to Kirkstall Abbey. And it's dated 1300 and something. complete with a lovely wax seal on it. Now that's hardly ephemera. It survived 14th century, but it just turned up in this list, and woman didn't know where it had come from, but there it was, and so that was more expensive than the Duke with an item. But it's written in some strange form of Latin, not straightforward Latin at all. And I think it might have been Kevin said to me, the person who can translate it for is Michael Collinson, who was the former archivist, right, who died just recently. So I trundled around to see Michael, and he translated this. I mean, incredible. In this great city of Leeds, you always find somebody, can't you, do something like that. And so I got to have the translation of it. But that was from that list, but that's a rather special list that comes out. Anything else?
Just a comment, when you're talking about where these things come from, of course, the lady next to me, Liz Lincoln, when she downsized, often before some of your ephemera went to the Meadowcroft Archive Service, and some of it came to the Forces Society. Patrick and I went around and saying, "Oh, this is good," but the absolute prized possession that I thought we must have this was the Leeds Labour Party pantomime programme, which had as Dandini Alan Swanson.
I'm not sure whether it's wonderful for the Labour Party to be associated with pantomime. Yes, you have the question.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Really interesting. Yeah. There is a clip of film from George Rattler, from the not from the person here, but 2 years later, Civic Week, speaking from the town hall steps. It's a clip which somebody filmed it and I've archived it. It's actually quite good that there is more awareness of the importance of these things now. One time they'd all gone to skip, but now every now and again, I get often a political colleague said I'm, moving into a flat. Is anybody interested in all my papers? Yes, and grab them. But it's quite good. Rachel, you were. Right, yes. Yes. When is it? All right, there you are. Yeah, I did speak of the blue placard there as well, I remember. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Well, can I thank you, Michael, for a fascinating talk, which brought back a few memories, because I do remember the Yorkshire Penny Bank. And while you were talking about it, I wondered whether I ever withdrew my savings when I left school, or whether the money is still there. It is our tradition to present our speaker with a small token.
Oh, yeah.
And so I present you with this small token. It has written on it, presented by the Thorsby Society. So when you spent it, you might like to add it to your. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'll leave that on while you're looking at the material.
So do you have time for people to come and have a look at Michael's wonderful exhibits?
That was from Susan Sontag novel, and I read that and I thought, oh my God, that's me. What is the collector? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was brilliant.